Hello, thank you for visiting Echoes of Crime. Today, I want to tell you a case that sounds like it belongs in a horror movie, but is hauntingly real. I want you to picture the dawn breaking over Manaus, the capital of the Brazilian state of Amazonas. It is May 28, 2024, and dawn brings with it anxiety. Family members huddle together, anxious, toward a gated house in a quiet neighborhood. The last time they heard from Zai Cardoso was more than 24 hours ago. The silence has become alarming. They knock on the gate. There is no answer. The silence seems eerie. When the lock opens, they enter to find her brother Adamar Fares. His face is tense as if he too has rehearsed this appearance. Inside were Xi Jinping's mother, Cusimar Cardoso, and her beauty salon staff. They looked like familiar family members, but today, they seemed like characters in someone else's story. When they were led into the bedroom, the family found Xi lying motionless, wrapped in a blanket. She looked like she was sleeping, but she wasn't. When relatives asked, "Is she okay?" they received only vague answers like, "She's resting, it's part of a spiritual process." At that moment, every heartbeat in the room changed. Xi would never wake up. They immediately called an ambulance. Investigators arrived a few hours later. It was clear Xi had never been taken to a hospital, despite signs that she was in serious trouble. A few days earlier, she had been bedridden, severely swollen, using adult care products, even having difficulty speaking. This deterioration was unmistakable tragedy. In that bedroom, surrounded by quiet denial and an eerie calm, her loved ones asked only one question that mattered: what really happened here? Xi Cardoso was born Dilar Cardoso Caras da Silva. A native of Manaus, she rose to local fame through the traditional Bamba Mu Boi festival, performing as the central female figure, the Sinhazen da Fazenda of the Garantido team. In that role, she radiated confidence, cultural pride, and charisma that made her a crowd favorite. After leaving the carnival world, she turned to beauty and business. She opened a chain of salons across Manaus, building a high-profile brand on Instagram and TikTok that promised wellness, transformation, and self-care. In public, she is calm, decisive, charming, someone who has achieved success through discipline and vision. Friends, clients, and followers see her as a modern icon, a graceful woman building her own empire. On social media, she shares flashy updates, new treatments, lifestyle insights, disciplined routines. Her personal image and her business image are so closely intertwined that there is almost no room for the private woman behind the mirror. Her personal circle is quite small and private. She lives at home with her mother and brother. They all seem to have a neutral, professional relationship, even though social media posts sometimes show her mother. Adamar hardly appears in public. On the surface, they seem to live like a normal, orderly family, until suddenly everything goes wrong. On the night of May 27, the atmosphere in the house was tense. Xi looked weak, mostly lying in bed. There were a few people at home that night: her mother, her brother Adamar, her ex-boyfriend Bruno, and the salon staff. Bruno shot the first video at 11:40 p.m., which was already late. In the video, Xi held a vial of ketamine in one hand and a syringe in the other. Bruno's voice was heard: "Put it down. Don't give another dose." She didn't respond. She was deep in the haze of a psychotropic drug. Another video 30 minutes later showed her searching for the syringe cap. Bruno's voice was now more frustrated, urging her to rest, to stop. She said she was going to give another dose. The staff in the back remained silent, detached, silent, watching. Bruno still held the camera. Later, he said he tried to help but never stopped filming. He didn't call for help either. That night, Xi Jinping talked about going on a journey, referring to the spiritual beliefs associated with ketamine, of parallel realities of soul travel. It's not a mythical term. It's how the people in that house viewed ketamine, not as a drug but as a portal. The video cuts out. Xi loses consciousness. Around 2 a.m., she passes out quietly, but no one calls an ambulance. No one escapes the fog of spiritual ritual and denial. The people in the room insist she's not dead. They say she's just temporarily separated from her body and she'll be back in 4 hours. When dawn breaks, they carry her out into the sunlight, believing the rays might bring her spirit back. But when nothing changes, they take her back into the house. No one seeks medical help. Reality slips into fantasy. When investigators later reviewed the footage, they found a house filled with disbelief. Xi Jinping's death was not sudden. It was the culmination of a long period of passivity, of choice, of a refusal to accept that she needed urgent care. The tragedy was whispered into rather than shouted. Public outrage followed, not just for the loss of life but for the lack of accountability. A month before her death, relatives contacted the police. On April 24, 2024, officers responded to concerns. Xi Jinping was deteriorating out of adult diapers, unable to walk, and refusing visitors. When the police arrived, they were greeted by her mother, Klusimer. She insisted Xi Jinping was fine. Xi Jinping spoke to them briefly and refused medical assistance. No follow-up, no pleading, no protection. Family members then created a WhatsApp group called something like Save Xi Jinping. They tried to get her into a clinic, but bureaucratic inertia prevailed. Although the situation had clearly deteriorated, no one took the matter to the next level. That April visit was the last recorded interaction with the authorities. Xi Jinping lived in a closed loop seen by caregivers who should have called an ambulance, living in a system that believed in spiritual explanations rather than medical intervention. When the official investigation began, police discovered that what appeared to be family life and entrepreneurship was actually underpinned by a cult-like structure. It called itself Pai Mai Vita, the father-mother life. The symbol appeared in tattoos, in group rituals. Spiritual distortions dominated everyday life. At these gatherings, Xi Jinping vowed to restore energy through so-called light training. His mother and brother attended. Some were drawn in reluctantly out of loyalty or fear. The use of ketamine became routine, microdoses, metered insulin injections purchased from a veterinary clinic without a prescription. It was organized but not regulated. In public, Xi's salons continued to operate. Articles continued to be published. Clients continued to book appointments. Casual observers were oblivious to anything unusual. But behind closed doors, something sinister and secretive was going on. A home that had become a haven for addiction, a false belief system, a disregard for responsibility. Xi Jinping became the center but powerless in his own corrupt system. The psychological stress here was enormous. What destroyed a confident, successful woman who had built her public image on self-reliance and health? How do you go from empowerment to being trapped in spiritual distortion and community denial? The moral dilemma. Those closest to Xi Jinping, those who could have acted, did nothing. Spiritual justifications, shared beliefs, fear of breaking collective cohesion, or refusal to face the truth all became complicit. To understand what happened, you have to start long before May 2024. Pai Mai Vita wasn't originally called a cult. There were no robe-wearing rituals, no doomsday prophecies. It was simply a loose network of close family and friends centered around Xi Jinping's mother, Klusimer. Over time, however, it evolved into something much more closed off, something with rules, hierarchies, and rituals that blurred the line between healing and harm. Members believed in the power of light sessions, a mix of mysticism, pseudoscience, and drugs. They thought they could purify the body, rewire the spirit, and even transcend to other dimensions of existence. And for Xi, the star of this circle, the pressure was on to embody the ideal: perfect beauty, perfect energy, perfect discipline. Ironically, most things start with something as superficial as weight loss. In 2023, Xi and his brother Adamar began using anabolic steroids. No prescription, no supervision, just something they believed would change their appearance. Soon, Klusimer joined in. These enhancers had become a part of everyday life, seen as harmless, even beneficial. But in their quest for something better, the family took a dangerous detour, introducing ketamine into their lives. At first, they took small doses, telling themselves they had it under control. Then a family friend suggested shots would make the effects stronger. That's when the drug became a ritual: measured doses, insulin syringes, carefully timed sessions, overseen by Klusimer, who claimed to know exactly how much each person needed. The source: veterinary clinics are available without prescriptions, and so drug use is not chaotic, it is systematic. It has rules, schedules, and purposes rooted in belief. That makes it even harder for anyone in the group to see it for what it is: dependency disguised as enlightenment. On the surface, nothing seems amiss. Beauty salons are running smoothly. Clients are coming in for appointments. Xi's social media feeds are filled with smiling photos, beauty tips, and inspirational captions. Behind closed doors, however, the salons are more than just hair and makeup salons. Some rooms have become gathering places for Pai Mai Vita sessions. Employees are invited, sometimes forced. The price of refusing: it's gambling your place in the industry, gambling your status in Xi Jinping's inner circle. One witness, Claudiel Santos, a makeup artist and trusted employee, later told investigators that loyalty was everything. If you disagreed, you could find yourself pushed out. She described a workplace where you didn't question strange rituals, where speaking up could mean losing your livelihood, and so a culture of silence developed. Salons remained open, social media posts were polished, and the truth remained hidden. But there was a moment when things could have changed. On April 24, 2024, a month before Xi Jinping died, the police knocked on Cardoso's door. Relatives had been worried for weeks. Xi Jinping didn't answer her phone, she hadn't left her house, and according to family members, she couldn't walk on her own. When the police arrived, Cloussemer greeted them warmly. She insisted that Xi was fine. She even allowed them to talk briefly. After that brief conversation, the police decided there was no reason to intervene. We may never know what Xi Jinping's true condition was that day. Was she conscious enough to speak for herself, or had she fallen into a state of dependence? Either way, the visit ended with no follow-up, no medical examination, no forced intervention. That was the last time law enforcement saw Xi alive. Relatives who tried to help were devastated. They set up a Rescue Xi WhatsApp group to coordinate plans to get her out of the house and into a rehab center. But no one had the legal authority to force her, and every attempt to intervene was thwarted by those inside the house. The Cardoso home was now more than just a family home. It had become an echo chamber. All the voices inside agreed on one thing: the outside world didn't understand. They didn't need doctors, they didn't need rehab, they had their own way. That way was Pai Mai Vida. If you think that sounds extreme, consider this. Xi Jinping's grandmother, Maria Venena, died in similarly bizarre circumstances less than a year ago. In the summer of 2023, during the Bumbamu Boy Festival, Maria was at her home in Parintins with Xi, Cloussemer, and Adamar. She was old, frail, and in poor health. But instead of calling a doctor, the family performed a life-restoring therapy session. It involved the same substance, the same belief that drugs plus rituals could bring about renewal. Maria was unconscious. Her condition deteriorated rapidly. However, no medical help was called. She died in that house. Her death was not investigated. Her departure was explained as natural causes. It was not until Xi Jinping died that the police began to connect the dots. That this belief system had a disastrous history. What is remarkable here is not just the drug use, it is the structure. Pai Mai Vida was neither chaotic nor random. It operated like a small religious organization. There was a leader, Cloussemer, who had the last word. There were rituals, gentle healing sessions, measured doses, sunbathing after taking the medicine to call the spirit back. There was a common language, spiritual phrases, references to journeys and other realms. There was even a kind of catechism drawn from altered quotes from books and pseudo-spiritual teachings. And above all, there was an unshakable certainty that they were right and that anyone outside the group could not see the truth. It was that certainty that kept Xi in the house. It was that certainty that allowed her condition to worsen without intervention. And ultimately, it was that certainty that no one in the house called for help that night. By May 2024, Xi was no longer the confident businesswoman the public knew. She was physically frail, dependent on others for basic needs, and deeply entrenched in a system that normalized her dependence. But the scary thing is, if you had walked into her salon in those final weeks, you might never have guessed it. Her hair was still styled, her makeup was flawless, her brand was still alive. On Instagram, she was still living her best life. And that's what makes this story so haunting, because it was not just a personal tragedy, it was a performance. A performance so convincing that even as she lay dying, the world thought she was doing well. Xi Cardoso's final night was marked by neither panic nor urgency. It was marked by ceremony and silence. On the evening of May 27, 2024, at the Cardoso home, Xi was weak, barely able to move on her own. Her mother, her brother, her ex-boyfriend Bruno, and a few trusted salon employees were all present. The atmosphere was tense, but no one called a doctor. No one rushed to the hospital. Instead, the atmosphere was strangely relaxed, as if everyone believed they were in control. Bruno, for reasons that remain controversial, began filming. The first clip was timestamped at 11:40 p.m. It showed Xi Jinping holding a bottle of ketamine in one hand and a syringe in the other. Her movements were slow and unfocused. Bruno's voice interrupted. "Put it down, don't take another dose." She didn't answer. Her face was a mask, dreamy, distant. 30 minutes later, another tape. She was lying on the bed now, looking for the syringe cap. Bruno seemed more frustrated this time, telling her to stop, to rest. Zai mumbled that she was going to give her another injection, and then nothing happened. No physical intervention, no attempt to remove the medication, no emergency call. Instead, the people in the room, mother, brother, staff, remained strangely still, watching, waiting. Bruno later insisted that he had tried to help, that she hadn't listened, that he had stayed because he cared, but the investigators saw something else: passivity, a choice to document rather than act. The group's belief system, Pai Mai Vita, was deeply ingrained. Zai was no longer seen as a patient in a health crisis. She was seen as a spiritual traveler, and ketamine is not a dangerous drug, it is a sacred tool. That is why when her body began to fail, no one reached for the phone to call emergency services. Around 2 a.m., Zai quietly left, but in everyone's eyes she was not dead. She had left her body and would return within a few hours, so they waited. 4 hours passed, nothing had changed. The morning sun filtered through the window. They carried her outside, letting the rays hit her face. It was believed that the sun would call her spirit back. Science said that rigor mortis was beginning, however they kept the ritual. After a while they brought her back into the house. Only when the family came and demanded action did someone call emergency services. By then it was too late. The videos Bruno recorded became the focus of the investigation. They were chilling, not because of what they showed, but because of what they didn't show. There was no urgency, no chaos. Just the calm of people who believed they were doing the right thing while doing nothing. And it wasn't the first time. Investigators linked Zai's death to the earlier passing of her grandmother, Maria Venina, in 2023. Maria's death occurred during one of these so-called resurrection sessions using similar substances. No doctors were called. No outside witnesses witnessed her final hours. And like Zai's, her death was explained away as natural when, in fact, it occurred in a sealed chamber of belief and denial. By this time, police were beginning to see Pai Mai Vita for what it really was. An organized, tightly controlled group with all the hallmarks of a small cult. There was a leader, Klusimer, who decided who used what, when, and how much. There was a system, ketamine doses were measured in a controlled ritual, and there was a closed network, loyal family members, carefully selected salon staff, and trusted suppliers. The last part, suppliers, is where the investigation began to unravel. Authorities traced the ketamine to a veterinary clinic in Manaus. The clinic was run by José Maximo Silva de Oliveira. On paper, the clinic sold the drug to animals. But in reality, it was being supplied to human customers without a prescription for purposes that had nothing to do with veterinary medicine. From the clinic, the drugs were passed to middlemen, a Dahmer, other family members, and some of the salon's employees. From there, they were shipped directly to the Cardoso family. The police realized they were investigating not just a death, but a criminal network. By June 2024, the operation was underway. Arrest warrants were issued. Surveillance was conducted. On June 7, the police moved in. They arrested Bruno and a man named Athos Silla, both of whom were present during Xi Jinping's final days and were believed to be active participants in the Pai Mai Vita ritual. They also arrested 2 employees of the veterinary clinic. The arrests showed how well prepared the group was. When the police entered the Cardoso home, they found luggage packed, papers missing, and phones turned off as if the occupants were ready to disappear. The issue was no longer one of misunderstanding or misjudgment. It was the deliberate actions of people who knew they were in trouble and were preparing to flee. But it was about more than drugs. It was about control. Employees described an environment where group loyalty was expected and questioning rituals was dangerous. Salons were also ritual spaces. Spiritual language masked chemical reality. And everything revolved around maintaining the illusion that this was about healing, not harm. Even after Xi Jinping's death, some members still cling to the belief that she chose her path, that it was not apathy but faith. That is the moral heart of this case. Take away the mystical element and you see a woman in danger surrounded by people who refuse to help. But inside Pai Mai Vita they see something else entirely. A spiritual journey, a test of spiritual strength, a process that outsiders cannot understand. This is the paradox of belief systems like this. From the outside, they seem dangerous, irrational. But from the inside, they seem righteous, and that is what makes them so dangerous. The case was quickly brought to trial. Prosecutors determined that Pi Mai Vita was not a loose spiritual group, but an organized criminal group that operated illegal medical practices, drug trafficking, and manipulation under the guise of faith. In December 2024, the court handed down its verdict: 10 years, 11 months, and 8 days in prison for the defendant. The judge rejected the defense's argument that the drug use was voluntary, calling it systematic exploitation and abuse of trust. But even with the verdict, unanswered questions remain. Were others involved who slipped away undetected? Are similar groups still operating quietly in other Brazilian cities? And the biggest question, if just one person in that room on May 27 picked up the phone and called for help, would Xi Jinping still be alive? When the verdict was handed down in December 2024, it sent shockwaves far beyond Manaus. 10 years, 11 months, and 8 days in prison for those convicted. It sounded decisive, final, but in reality it was the end of a legal chapter, not an emotional one. Because in the court of public opinion, the trial was about more than Pi Mai Vita. It was about trust. And what happens when you give that trust to the wrong person? In the weeks after the arrest, social media was abuzz with grief and disbelief. How could someone like Xi Jinping, so confident, so charming, so admired, have ended up in this situation? To her fans, she was untouchable. To her customers, she was a model of success. And to her online followers, she was the embodiment of self-made beauty and discipline. But it was the cruelest deception of all. Because even as her life was falling apart, the show never stopped. The images kept appearing. The videos kept circulating. Customers kept booking appointments at beauty salons where the rituals continued behind closed doors. It was not just a double life, but a master class in hiding pain behind perfection. The public wanted answers. Why didn't someone stop her sooner? Why did the police leave that April day when they came to her house? Why did her family, salon staff, even close friends remain silent? Some blame Pi Mai Vita's cult-like control. Others point to a broader cultural problem, the way society is often reluctant to challenge other people's beliefs, even when those beliefs are clearly life-threatening. And for those closest to Xi Jinping, the guilt is suffocating. But perhaps the most heartbreaking part of this story is how normal it all seems to those involved. The loyalists are not cartoon villains, nor are they masterminds of evil. Many are ordinary people caught up in something that is making their moral compasses increasingly fuzzy. They watch, they participate, they stay silent because it's the norm. Because they believe they are part of something bigger. And because in groups like this, questioning the leader is like betraying family. This is the hidden truth of many small cults. Most members are not kidnappers. They are kidnapped but don't realize they've been trapped. There are, however, moments when Xi Jinping's fate can change. Moments when someone can break the rules and pick up the phone. But breaking that silence doesn't just mean losing her job. It also means breaking the collective reality of the group. It means admitting that everything they've done, every ritual, every belief is not healing her. It's killing her. And that's a hard truth for anyone with a belief system to accept. After the trial, investigators issued a warning to the public. Groups like Pi Mai Vita don't just disappear when their leaders go to jail. They adapt, they innovate, they seek out new supporters. This is a hard reality to accept because these groups rarely seem dangerous in the first place. They often start as self-help groups, wellness retreats, or alternative healing communities. And for a while they work. People feel better, they feel understood, they feel empowered. But when a group puts faith above reality, when it demands loyalty beyond life, that's when it stops being harmless. That's when it becomes dangerous. In Manaus, the shadow of the case lingers. Some of Xi's former clients refuse to speak her name. Others fiercely guard her memory, distancing her from the group that haunted her. Her salon, they're gone. The brand she built, the empire that once made her untouchable, has evaporated. And for her family, what's left is a legacy twisted beyond recognition. There is also the question of justice. Yes, people have been convicted. Yes, the ketamine supply chain has been shut down, but what about the human toll? It cannot be measured in years or days. Because no sentence can bring Xi Jinping back. No judgment can undo the years she spent trapped in a web of manipulation, dependency, and false hope. And for those who loved her, really loved her, the hardest thing to take is not her death. It is knowing that in the end she did not die surrounded by her enemies. She died surrounded by people she trusted. When you strip away everything, the fame, the ritual, the drugs, what remains is a cautionary tale. A tale of how easily healing can become exploitation. A closed group of people can twist the meaning of love into something unrecognizable. And the greatest danger doesn't always come from strangers lurking in the shadows. Sometimes it comes from those who claim to be protecting you. And perhaps that's why this story touches the heart so deeply. Because whether you live in Manaus or on the other side of the world, it forces you to ask a question we'd all rather avoid. If someone you love is in trouble but they don't see it as trouble, what would you do to save them? Would you break their trust? Would you risk losing them to save them? Or would you, like so many others in Xi Jinping's world, stand there hoping for the best? Until it's too late, this isn't just a story about a cult in Brazil. It's a mirror to each of us. A reminder that faith, no matter how beautiful, no matter how comforting, should never cost a life. Xi Cardoso's life should have meant more than its tragic end. It should have been about her talent, her ambition, her love of culture, and the career she built from nothing. And that's how she deserves to be remembered. But we cannot honor her without telling the truth about her death. Because only then, only when we name the danger, can we hope to stop it from taking another life. And so, when you hear the name Pai Mai Vida now, it won't be about lessons in light or spiritual journeys. It will be about a woman whose light was dimmed too soon by the very people who were supposed to help her shine. That's the end of the story. But if there's anything you can learn, it's this. Sometimes the scariest stories aren't about monsters lurking in the dark. They're about the ones sitting in your living room, holding your hand and telling you they're here to save you, while slowly lighting you to your end.